Food is important, but we take it for granted. 3 times a day for our entire lives we eat, and yet the most basic and fundamental questions about what we eat are lost, hidden among the growing noise of the latest food fad. Fundamental questions like how's our food grown and where does it come from? For many, the answer to this is simple. Farmers grow it, then we buy it, then we eat it. The end. As it turns out, investigating the roots of our food system is extraordinarily complicated and literally requires a full-fledged team of researchers. In an attempt to follow the trail, an initiative got started at McGill University called the McGill Food Systems Project. They're grounded in student-led research, and they work with food and dining services, with their chef, with their staff, all in the hopes of uncovering answers to some of the simplest, but yet most complicated questions about the food that McGill students eat. Their work, which is still ongoing, has started to throw popular assumptions about the roots of our food system out the window. So let's start with what we know. For most students, it all begins in a dining hall with a plate full of food. A plate that has a story, since each ingredient has its own unique life history, where the food was grown and how it got here. But none of that shows up on the menu. All we ever see is this menu, which gives us a series of choices, but what choices have been made before? It starts with McGill Food and Dining Services, who are responsible for setting the menu and ordering the food. As a part of the university, they manage 5 dining halls on campus, 2 of which are subcontracted to a food service provider. As a large institution, all of their choices are a function of scale, as serving 4,000 meals a day, 5 days a week, 8 months out of the year is no small task. Beyond scale, there are a number of factors that affect the menu, including price, quality, volume, safety, reliability, accountability, demand, and even locality. Thrown in the daily mix of responsibilities, this is a lot to consider, but fortunately they're not alone. Help comes in the form of suppliers and distributors, middlemen who essentially transport, store, and deliver food products directly to dining halls. Relying on their mutually beneficial relationships with institutions, the magnitude of these orders is what creates large economies of scale. So a typical day at a produce supplier begins with a sales meeting where a team of buyers and sellers are given updates on the current and forecasted temperatures in key growing regions such as Quebec, California, and Mexico. These meetings help the team anticipate fluctuations in price, quality, or other more general sourcing issues that might affect the company's purchase, and therefore McGill's order. As a result, they maintain constant dialogue with all their possible growers and wholesalers. And these companies will also ensure that legal and financial responsibility for the food is taken. Once ordered, storage becomes the priority, although no item will call the warehouse home for more than a day and a half. With this much throughput, suppliers do not always have the time to deal directly with the distant farms on which they rely so heavily to maintain the consistency of our menus, and that's where brokers come into the picture. Brokers in the food industry essentially buy produce from farmers and then resell it to suppliers and distributors without ever coming into physical contact with the food itself. So why are brokers even used? Well, often farmers don't have enough time or expertise to maintain international contacts overseas and across borders. Brokers, by contrast, they're professional networkers. If there's no large enough market locally to keep the farm afloat, a broker gets hired to make sure that the farmer's produce get to retail contacts all over the world. They help markets find farmers and farmers find markets. An incredibly adaptive on-demand economy, this combination of networking, storage, and distribution enables us to essentially overcome both seasonal and day-to-day variability in the weather when setting the menus. This helps us forget that our menus have a life history to begin with. And with such unprecedented stability in the supply of our food, it's an accomplishment that the question of serving 4,000 meals a day in a city that's frozen half the year never crosses anyone's mind. In addition, we've gained access to previously inaccessible foods from across all seasons. But as with any system, these benefits come with trade-offs. The most obvious is our complete reliance on fossil fuels, a non-renewable source of energy and all of its implications. The second is that conventional farming practices undermine the viability of the land for future generations. So what motivates us to understand this story? The short answer is that in order to effect change, one must know the system and its constraints. Otherwise, our efforts will remain fragmented and futile. Food is inherently tied to the most important economic, ecological, and social justice issues of our generation. And of the myriad of problems that we're faced with, food sustainability stands out as having the widest and most tangible appeal to and impact on individuals. Not only does it clearly demonstrate the global impact of local choices, it's universally relevant because regardless of ecological awareness, social group, political orientation, everybody needs to eat. As a large institution, the most constructive course of action is to support the most sustainable farming practices for a regional context. In order to do that, there are a number of obstacles. The first pressure is that the origins of the products change quite dramatically. It's precisely the frequency of these changes and the adaptability of the system which make it so difficult to trace the origins of the food to the specific plot of land from which it came. A second obstacle is that the system is only set up to track the origins of food in detail during situations of crisis or recall. The barcodes on the boxes of produce allow direct tracing to the farm from which it came, but this is a very time-intensive and therefore costly exercise. At the moment, the industry simply isn't structured to allow more than very basic information of price, safety, and occasionally region to travel from farm to plate. Suppliers, brokers, and other mediators, which allow for the incredible response speed and flexibility of the produce supply chain, unintentionally halt the flow of more complex information. Together, these two obstacles make it very difficult to not only track, but also choose the origins and therefore the agricultural practices that we're looking to support. In this system, strong and specific standards for sustainability are thus very hard to come by, leaving decision makers almost entirely unable to comprehensively determine the sustainability of certain sourcing decisions at all. Even if we did have full information, trying to figure out what the most sustainable choice would be requires the immense challenge of equating incommensurables, things that lack a common quality on which to make a comparison. Creating a traceable and sustainable food system for our campus is thus going to require extra work from actors somewhere along this supply chain. We've gone about it with what we call the anti-adversarialist approach, basically the assumption that we're all in this together. We focus on community building through dialogue, where students, profs, and administrators all have something to offer. This process has resulted in a ton of progress over the past 12 months, including mandatory minimum local purchasing by season adopted by McGill Food and Dining Services, over 30 students in applied research projects focused on the development of sustainability criteria by industry, the institutionalization of our project, involving the research, design, and negotiation of a full-time sustainability purchasing agent for McGill Food and Dining Services, reconnecting students to the seasonal availability of regional food through 10 local food days each year. Although the McGill Food Systems Project has only existed for such a short amount of time, our success is in part due to the fact that universities operate at a relevant scale for social change. As individuals, we feel empowered to effect change within them, and, as an institution, we have enough leverage to affect larger systems. For example, what we as a community choose to put on our menus has repercussions on the rest of the system and not just our mouths. In order to initiate real change, we had to begin with understanding how things worked and why. Even then, making decisions about what the most sustainable choices are has proved difficult. We've also learned that sustainability is not a static outcome, such that setting up processes to assess, evaluate, and implement regionally appropriate solutions to be the best way to overcome these challenges. Over time, we can become better informed to make choices intentionally and decide what repercussions we want to have, ultimately decreasing the distances, both physical and mental, between the farm and our plate.